Well, I noticed, particularly from working with teenagers, as I did, through a lot of the experiences that I talk about in capitalist realism, and also from myself, from observing myself, that now we're in a state now where there's forms of depression which arise from the hedonic, not from an inability to take pleasure, but from an inability to do anything else but take pleasure, as it were. Now, Berardi discusses this in terms of phenomena like Viagra, which he rightly says has nothing to do with impotence. It's just to do with speed, right? It's fucking too much faff. Seduction, seduction, eroticism. Fuck that. You know, let's get on with it. We haven't got time. Come on, I've got an email to answer. You know, like there's that, and you know, and pornography the same, isn't it? Pornography and that it's the same. Oh, we can't be bothered with actual sex. You know, whether it's too much bother. Let's you know, let's go straight to the meat of the thing. You know, and let's get on with it now. And actually, there's a good piece by Daniel Barrow on the music website The Quietus about pop music of recent years, where he argues that they have this Tayo Cruz and people like that, and where they have this crazed mega chorus, you know, that hits straight to the pleasure centers of the brain like audio crack. I think this is part of the same phenomenon as well, because there's this affective exhaustion, actually, that then we don't have time for these for erotics in a broad sense, actually, not just erotics in terms of sexuality, but erotics in terms of a kind of immersive enjoyment. We don't have time for that. No, I think that because there's an error in the way that we think about cyberspace. We think of cyberspace as immersive. Well, it steals a lot of our time, but I don't think it immerses. I think it's an immersion and transinhibitor in lots of ways, cyberspace. Or cyberspace time, as I say. Why we shouldn't just talk about space, we should talk about space-time. The space-time of communicative capitalism. Okay, which is partly why I started with that quote from Sherry Turkle about, you know, we're not there anymore. We're not here. We're not. Where are we? Because we're in cyberspace, which means that, you know, that older forms of collectivity have disappeared. You know, even the smallest level of collectivity, you could say, of you know, sexuality itself. You know, well, I don't want to suggest that sexuality has to be confined to two people, but starting at that level, you know, but then, you know, at that level, right up to even you know, televisual or radiophonic collectivities, and you know, the kind of music collectivities or dancing collectivities that I talked about at the start with, you know, in relation to burial and rave. That, I mean, and as I always say, I think the success of television programs like The X Factor, you know, really, on the face of it, extremely depressing phenomenon. But, you know, it actually attests to the fact that actually, if you can, what do people want from these programs? Is a sense of collectivity, that, you know, the sense that other people are watching at the same time. And you know, that's what, you know, that's what I think the you know, some of the great media manipulators of our time have capitalized on. They're able to, again, in this strange anachronistic hybrid where you have basically pre-rock and roll style 50s talent shows, augmented by kind of SMS texting and you know, all kinds of cyberspatial satellites, you know, that's we're still going to have to capitalize on this desire for collective experience, because everyone watches it, or, you know, feels as if everyone watches it, and that can't be said of, you know, many other things anymore. So I think we should be properly dialectical about these things. That there is something positive about them, this desire for collectivity does remain. But in terms of what I was saying about pathologies of the digital, have we even thought about how bad this is? Have we really thought about it? I mean, how much? I mean, look, let's look at it this way. How much did you care about communication 10 years ago? Okay, you'd want phone calls now and again, wouldn't you? I mean, you'd want them. You'd want letters. They're kind of nice. But you weren't not every 30 seconds. You didn't have a compulsive need to check for such communication, right? No, it didn't really matter that much. And let's face it, on a level of content, it still doesn't matter that much now.
You told me when you lecture that you don't check your mails, right? You haven't checked your mails now for 2 hours.
Oh no, but I haven't got my data services on my phone, so I couldn't do it anyway. So I need Wi-Fi, but.
I think this is just a quick statement. I think it also goes back to what we were saying before about living in a post-Fordist society. For the society, you had security, or a notion of security. Now there is no notion of security.
Right.
Your job is your jobs are shortened, and I think that's also the main reason why a lot of us have gone in, or the world has gone into this checking your email every 10 seconds, is because it's a security thing.
Well, I think that's part of the excuse that we make for ourselves, and it's also, but it's not false either. It's true, but it seems to be true. But I have to say that I've been effectively self-employed for 4 or 5 years now, and I have to say that in all of that time, really, if I'd have left an email for half a day, wouldn't have missed out on anything. If I'd only checked emails twice a day, I wouldn't have missed out on anything. And let's face it, if it required me to do it there and then, I couldn't have done it anyway, could I? So that, do you know what I mean? That I agree. I think, and Berardi is very powerful at bringing out, I think, the extent to which we fall into that belief that unless we're up on things in this ultra agitated way, then we will fall behind. We won't compete. But that's not actually true. It just seems that way. But the thing is, again, we can't take responsibility for this ourselves too much. That we're supposed to be thinking that way. Well, yeah. I mean, it's being in an agitated state, constantly agitated state, and the reduction of anxiety. This is one of the things that I try and emphasise in capitalist realism. That we totally misunderstand ideology, and Orwell is responsible for that in lots of ways. Or this boring, all these boring science fiction totalitarian things where, totalitarian regimes are just trying to make you think something, man. And just trying to regiment you and all of that. They don't want, and they want you to have this set of beliefs that you have to stick to. That's not what they want. They want you to be anxious. This is the form of, this is ideal, and that's why I would say that I think sort of this is why the women's magazine is the model of ideological interpolation, right? Which is believe 2 different things at once. Oh look, it's okay. You can be any size you want. Here's a diet. How are you supposed to respond to that? You hold these 2 things at once in your mind as impossible kind of synthesis of. On one side, you're really sure it's fine to be what I am. No, I've got a diet now. And these mixed messages are not accidental. I mean, or they might be accidental, but it's a very happy accident for capital in a sense that, that someone who's in a constant state of anxiety, constantly agitated, is not able to act in any effective way. As I said, that this is the function of a lot of the surveillance mechanisms or self-surveillance mechanisms, which have been brought in under neoliberalism. The ostensible, why do I have to fill in a 50-page logbook in order to, and why do I have to do a active scheme of work where I fantasize about what I'll be teaching students in 50 weeks' time? That in this lesson at 11:15 will be. I mean, obviously, it's just as ludicrous as any kind of crazed science fiction or Stalinist plan. It's got no relation to any reality that's ever going to happen. Why am I required to do it then? To increase efficiency, my efficiency as a teacher? No, the very fact that I'm filling it in is decreasing my efficiency as a teacher. Right? Because let's face it, if I was just convalescing and just watching TV, at least have more energy to do my actual work, rather than doing this. So what is the point of it? Is to produce this sense of endless anxiety. Like I say, the inspection regimes, they, if one is to read these documents and try to interpret how one is to deliver lessons properly, you know, it's Talmudic. You know, it's this Talmudic act of interpretation. You know, and of course the people who are inspecting you are also engaging in the same Talmudic act of interpretation. They don't fully know. They're also in a state of anxiety. They can only guess as to what the you know, the real meaning of what is really wanted here. But this generalized state of we don't know what is really wanted, yet we still have to try and guess what is wanted. This is typical of the mode of ideology to which we're now subject. I think it's very successful as well. You know, and also because it comes dressed as it's for us. It's for us as well. You know, like why are you doing this? Is for your own personal development. You know, you don't want to be static. You don't want to be left behind, do you? You want to learn new things about how to do your job, don't you? And that's, all of that package is very successful, especially when it is reinforced in popular culture as well. And this, I think, connects, you know, your point and with yours as well about this responsibility all the time. You know, popular culture is always, you know, always reinforcing this idea that we could be better if we put more effort into X, Y, and Z. You know, that if only and therapy is a major, that the diffusion of therapeutic logic is a major part of this. All of the above is what I describe as privatization of stress. Okay, that's a key kind of process that's happened over the last 20, 30 years as a part of the securing of neoliberalism. Of course, we all know about the privatization of formerly nationalized industries, organizations, etc. But, you know, alongside that has been this privatization of stress, where, you know, that's part of removing trade unions from the picture. Okay, before, if your hours increase, if your working conditions deteriorate, if your terms of employment become more tenuous, you know, you become anxious, and you become anxious because of those things, right? And that is an accepted explanation of why you are more anxious. What do you do with your anxiety? Okay, you probably, you know, go with other workers, you'll gang up together and say, look, we don't think this is fair. But why are things getting worse for us? That's not what happens now. Okay, those same procedures go on. Well, it's just part of reality. It's just part of reality. You can't adjust to it. You must be ill. Go to the doctor. Go to the doctor. What would a doctor do? Well, you know, if you're lucky, you'll get therapy. That's probably, in the UK anyway, I can tell you from first-hand experience, you have to have killed yourself or tried to, or you have to try to kill yourself in order to get therapy on a National Health Service. That's, more likely, you'll be given some happy pills from pharmaceutical, you know, nicely, kindly provided to you by a multinational pharmaceutical company. You know, and that's a perfect circuit, isn't it? It's brilliant. You know, like instead of your discontent is your fault, but it's okay. You know, corporate capital's on hand to solve it for you. You know, with pills. Yeah, it's fine.
About this, because it seems like this kind of big society that the Conservative Party launched recently seems to really connect with what you're.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and the whole idea of the face state or the Facebook state that people are trying to, which is then going back to the kind of responsibility towards the individual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think there's this shift from neoliberalism into Victorian liberalism in the UK at the moment. No, seriously, it's from cybergothic to steampunk. You know, like it's ridiculous. Like they. Actually, I want to introduce another thinker into the mix at this point, who is not very well known, and I think should be better known. Is a therapist. Well, I don't know if he called himself a therapist. Called David Smail. That's S-M. A-I-L, and Smail wrote a number of books in the 90s in the last decade, which really pulled together a number of the threads we talked about today, actually. Smale argues in ways strangely similar to Metzinger, actually, that there is no such thing as a self in the way that we understand it, that actually what we call the self is really commentary, as he calls it. It's a kind of internalized set of explanations for what for sort of what is going on in our life world, as it were. But the point is that doesn't explain anything about why we like what we are. He makes a series of simple moves which nevertheless are devastating to the kind of spontaneous ideology in which we live, which is to say that clearly he argues that the most powerful forces acting upon us are not our mummy and daddy, who themselves have been acted upon by some much stronger forces. Those the forces of business interests, etc. Power. Power is the key question for him, and what are the forces of power operating in society? They're distal, as he puts it. They're not proximal. They're distal. Anything that is in the world of experience that we, immediate experience, is already an effect of these distal forces. And okay, now that's in a way it's pretty obvious. I would have thought this. I guess most of us here will probably think that way. However, as Smale says, actually though, the way that therapy operates is on a completely opposite assumption. Therapy operates, as Smale devastatingly puts it, Thatcher's idea that there's no such thing as society, only individuals and their families, is echoed by the practice of therapy, which will focus obsessively on, if you have therapy, it will be about your family and your childhood generally. That's the therapeutic dimension. I had therapy. I had a cognitive behavioural therapy, which is one of the most popular forms of therapy in the UK at the moment. And I had it because I was very seriously depressed, and try anything really. But actually, so what cured me from depression is partly the underlying story, the backstory of capitalist realism really is that politics saved me from depression. I think in lots of ways, the recovery of politics, because I mean, what is depression? Depression is this feeling of heavy responsibility. That it's a double thing. I'm responsible for the miserable state of my life, but I can't do anything about it. Only I can. It's like Kafka's, short story that Before the Law, if you know that, the door to the law is only meant for you, but you don't go through it. But that's how depression feels. That only I can do anything about it. Yet I'm incapable of acting, and that's the problem. Is that therapy operates with certainly cognitive behavioural therapy just puts a positive spin on that. Just says you are responsible. Just change your story, change it, and you'll be okay.
That's just what I mean with this reprogramming.
Yeah.
Were you saying that what actually saved you wasn't the cognitive behavioral reprogramming? It was actually being concerned and getting, things sorted out. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean, you're right that CBT operates on that "kneel and you will believe" basis to some degree. But the point is that, I think there's a difference though in that what I was talking about earlier was collective, kind of collective behaviours, not individual ones. Right. The point is that I think that why a lot of the clinical evidence about CBT suggests a very poor long-term recovery is because, that at an individual level it's not as simple as that. You can't just, any more than you can become a retail magnate if you just follow what Mary Queen of Shops says on her, BBC Pro. That you can't just reprogram your own, story about yourself on your own. But this is the point. Smale's argument is, look, ultimately, as simple as this, self-esteem is dependent on a public world. You know, that unless you're acting in a public world, unless there's a public world which one can refer to, which one, in order to, from which one can derive feelings of approbation or disapprobation or whatever. If you don't have that public world, then you will be struggling. And of course, we don't have that public world now. That is what has been dismantled. That is what is gone. We don't have that public world. Stress is privatized. It's our fault, but we can't do anything about it. That's not some depressive phantasm. That's actually true. We can't do anything about it in the conditions that we live at the moment. We're not able to do anything about it. So, there's perfect kind of end circuits, aren't there? Of we're endlessly told we're responsible. We feel bad about it. That makes us sort of depressed, feel down in certain ways. So we seek kind of either drugs or some kind of therapeutic and response to this. And like I say, therapy is not confined to the rooms of therapists. Therapy is widely disseminated. Eva Illouz has written a number of books about this. Oprah Winfrey has been this major kind of disseminator of the therapeutic worldview. It's just down to you. You can turn your own life around. So yes, this production of stress. Production of stress is absolutely crucial. But I think it's gone over this threshold recently with digital communications. And as I say, it's whilst what's the story we will tell ourselves about why we have to check our emails is that we have to do it for work in one way or another, and which is not a false story entirely. It's also hacked into our libido. And I just want to come back to this question of I forget what I was going to come back to now. Of trance and immersion. Okay, we think we're immersed in cyberspace. Cyberspace perpetually defers immersion. We can waste like hours and hours on it, but we're not immersed in it. In fact, it's the opposite of immersion, I would suggest. In that, what is this? We're endlessly driven. And Jodie Dean has written very well about this in her recent book, Blog Theory. There's a drive. The point is that why we're not immersed is immersion requires some kind of stillness, I think, in a way. A certain kind of stillness but this is what you don't have when you're on the internet. On the internet, there's this panic time. Maybe it's only me who feels this, but as soon as you open a page, this endless weight of network demand falls upon you. And you feel, you can't just stay on this. Come on, there's lots of other things you can be doing. And the urge to click off onto another page at any time is immense. And so I think we have this. Instead of having the now, we have the instant. But the instant is kind of splintered into these multiple windows at any time, isn't it? And what I mean by instant, carrying that sense of like instant coffee or something that's instantly available. But of course, this strange process happens, isn't it? That instead of living in a moment, what happens is the more that things are instant, the more that we defer them, as it were. And it's fantasy time when we'll actually look at them. Like, oh yeah, I'll open this, I'll save this for later or whatever. I'll open these 20 windows because the other 18 I will have time to look at them later. Of course, that time never arrives. But this is the disturbing fantasy, though, that we're subject to. That we're constantly deferring, doing things that we're constantly deferring that moment of immersion in this endlessly hurried state. We're always hurrying away from things. That's pretty worrying, right? And again, look at it from how things look like in the late 90s or whatever. Would you think it's sort of desirable, where you're in in a state of perpetual attentional deficit, where you simply can't. I mean, the quote from Christian Marazzi about the business managers who can't read a page of text. It's certainly true of a lot of teenagers that I've taught. The idea of you present them with a page of text, a side of text. I can't read that. I cannot read it. Now, the old school disciplinary response to that would be they can read it, make them, but they really have serious problems being able to hold attention on text for that length of time. And why wouldn't they have those problems? That they're plugged into a stimulation matrix. Stimulation, not right. A stimulus matrix. That all of the time they're not in these crumbling disciplinary institutions such as school. Okay, so what are they going to do? Go cold turkey and go in school and behave like 19th century disciplinary subjects? Of course they can't do that. The way in which they're required to process information outside the classroom is by attention, constant attentional kind of migration. Asking them to concentrate. It's physiologically beyond them. Because it requires. I'm not exaggerating. This requires retraining, and really, this is a few years ago when I was confronting this, and now with smartphones, etc. I think it can only have this can only have intensified. As we were discussing in one of the breaks earlier on, how would we cope? I mean, you're coping pretty well with sitting here, for this length of time. But if you had to sit through, I can imagine like 8 hours of school, or how long the school day is, without a phone or something to distract yourself. I mean, just think of the poor kids. No wonder they're in behavioural uproar and all of that. But because the speed of their the point is that the speed. I think Berardi brings this out well. I mean, you don't have to be a kind of nostalgic kind of humanist to see that there's an experiment that we're living in. It's an experiment about the limits of the limits of the organism. The organism is being augmented. We are cyborgs. I mean, it's totally banal now. We just take it for granted. We can't live without these prostheses. Everything Don Harry said and all of that. It's just now part of our everyday life, right? That's just simply true. But then, we still have got these physiological limits which are. Well, the question is what they are, and we're experimentally determining that at the moment. We're like lab rats, but without a laboratory technician overlooking the whole thing. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, sorry, at the back, yeah. No, it's fine.
Now, I would like to take us into a sort of broader field. If we imagine wild success as a society, and we name that as economic democracy, what do you propose as a actionable first step towards that goal?
Economic democracy? Yeah, what do you mean by that, though?
Well, it's sort of like the John Lennon quote, imagine no possession.
Okay, right, yeah. Okay, now, Dan Hine has got good stuff on this, okay, on democracy, right? I think his book is excellent on this. But I think when you try and think about these measures, it's an interesting effect happens. That even quite minor reformist measures seem practically unimaginable or inconceivable to be put in place. And so we're in this paradoxical situation where it seems that you would require a revolution in order to put reformist measures into place. Okay, this is this preface to what I'm going to say now, which is that. Okay, so his ideas are, okay, given the media and ideological ecology in which we live, that's dominated by big business interests, even though people don't accept those interests or persuaded by them. And that's an important point. Neoliberalism didn't win by persuading people. It won by making itself a reality to which we are subject. And that's the only way things will go. Given that is the case, okay, how can we change this? And which is the question for him of how do we democratize things? And this is I think why Hine's book is important is because it suggests, look, okay, Fordism wasn't that great. That the media institutions at the time of Fordism were top-down, inegalitarian and undemocratic. Okay, they might have produced better stuff than we get from, you know, Murdoch Corporation now, but okay, they still weren't ideal. So what do? So instead of being nostalgic for that moment, we think about when we wanted to escape from it, what did we want instead of what we had got at that time? It wasn't this. It was something else. So what would, for instance, a democratized media look like? Hind has concrete suggestions. He says it would look like what we need is not the democratization of comment, which we've now got, of course, where you know, if you have anything published in a newspaper, you're required to be subjugated to graffiti underneath it online, you know. But it's not that is a that's a kind of this idea of choice and comment is really a pallid sob compared to what people actually did want. What he argues is what we need is the public would act as media commissioners, not as consumers. Okay, so what would that involve? So he says, okay, what we need is the public to be involved in funding journalists. Okay, in the decision about how to fund journalists. He says you can have a certain amount of money set aside and you can fund however many hundred investigative journalists. And that what you would have is you'd have public committees deciding where that money went. Now, you both are aware, I think my response to this is double. I'm sort of thinking, okay, well, if that happened, things would really change a lot. At the same time as you're thinking, well, is that conceivable that would ever happen? You know, because I mean, the value for Hind of this is that the very fact of people engaging in these decision-making processes would reveal to them that what they already know. People already know the confected nature of the media reality in which they live. Yet they sort of, because they're not involved in its production, you know, they're still subject to it. You know, like, you know, if you do work in a media, is somewhat demystified. You know that, and effectively this is to draw everyone into working in the media. And also, the other response you might get when you're faced with these proposals is, oh, wouldn't everyone want more stories about Cheryl Cole and, you know, this kind of thing? Well, maybe they would, but I mean, I think that I agree with Hind that that's actually unlikely. That once people, you know, got an active role in deciding what sort of media that they got at this level of commissioning, where they were choosing what journalists would report on, I think that would change their attitude. I mean, I think a lot of the toxic aggression online is to do with feelings of just helplessness and impotence. Actually, that you know that people feel they've got. This is what people offer, isn't it? You have no real control over your lives. You have no real control over the economy or the media, but you can comment on our pieces. That you know that this is not any effect. No wonder people get sort of aggressive and antagonistic in a useless way, really. And he suggests the same really process could be applied to funding of science as well, because of course the funding of science now is massively governed by the interests of the military, etc., and big corporations. Again, the very fact that if people were taking part, if the public were taking part in these decision-making processes, which are largely opaque to them now, the very fact they were taking part in them, Hind thinks, would immediately have this demystifying and democratizing effect. You know, so I don't know. I think that's one. I think that is one line through. The question is how plausible we think that is in the current situation. Whether that would have happened, given the level of vested interest against that kind of thing are so massive, right?
Wouldn't it again be very positive for corporate interest and so on to, after such interventions, that we could then sort of harvest the interests of the people and capitalize that as well?
Yeah, but they're already doing that. I mean, it was not that they're already doing that. I mean, in a sense, like the old autonomous story was that you know, it was the design. It was the proletariat which drove everything. That capitalism was, you know, that capitalism. All the innovations of capitalism were in response to the actions of the proletariat, etc., etc. Okay, that might continue to be the case in some way, but I think it would shift a power balance away from how things are now. I mean, part of what Heinz is arguing is that we need, like, the public isn't just the same as our population. You know, we don't have a public anymore. The conditions for we never had one either. That's the good thing about Heinz. He's not saying, "Oh, it was wonderful, this old public which we once had." You know, with property-owning men in the Victorian era or whatever. No, it wasn't good then. But there is a teleological process actually of, you know, that we can go back to, of enlightenment and democracy. That, you know, what is that progress? It's away from barbarism. What is, you know, barbarism is, you know, the rule by the wealthy and powerful. You know, I mean, and I think that we're still deep in barbarism. That's what we have to remember. We think of ourselves as we're sophisticated, we're beyond all that now. But, you know, can we imagine the perspective in 50 years' time on this current mess? Why? I know the idea. People look back. How do they accept this? You know, how do they accept this massive swindling? You know, of where you know, the poor and the most disadvantaged in society are required to pay for the, you know, something that a swindler that's that obvious and on that scale. How do people accept that? Only because we accept that we're still in a totally barbarian, you know, a barbarian world, where, you know, egalitarian objectives are pretty impossible to pursue, where the interests of the wealthy and the powerful are unassailable in lots of ways, you know. But this is a period of reaction and restoration, and that's how things look in periods of reaction and restoration. You know, what's interesting about the moment that we're in is that, you know, the reaction is troubled, isn't it? You know, it has been troubled. It's not, much as it's trying to have, in every sense, business as usual, it's struggling now. You know, and even in the heartlands of neoliberalism, like the UK and the US, we're seeing, you know, militancy emerge. And I think part of what's happening there is this conversion of depression, or disaffected feelings into political anger, and you know, a kind of reverse of everything that was necessary for the installation of capitalist realism in the first place. You know, which was precisely the opposite. That, you know, affects that would previously have been directed politically were turned inward. Was it to deny political articulation, and that whole, as I say, that whole explanation for why you are feeling down was denied to people. So it's, I don't know, but I mean, I think those suggestions are good ones. But I think also it's about, okay, what are we replacing trade unions with if we think trade unions are superseded? I don't think they necessarily are superseded. You know, that's, as I say, if you want the biggest single explanation for the emergence of capitalist realism, it is the demise of trade unions. Now, okay, why is it difficult for trade unions now? Not only because of an aggressive political project against them, it's because of post-Fordism, because of globalization. You know, that because the nature of, you know, the capitalist commodity chains now is much more complicated than it was. But does that mean that sort of worker solidarity is inconceivable? No, I don't think it does mean that. But what it means is that we need some kind of imaginative leaps in terms of what form these organisations would take. Now, I don't have the answer now, but you know, that's this sort of thing we have to be working on, isn't it? That, like I say, we can't think that we'll immediately have the answers to these things, you know, because everything has conspired against us even thinking about posing the questions. Never mind about the answers. But you know, now you know, I think Zizek is right when he says we shouldn't just act all the time or think we can act immediately. But we need to do something, and that something can be theoretical production as much as it is actually going out into the streets. So, and also like fictional production, imaginative. Like how would we picture this world that we want to live in? This is really hard when we try and do that. And and I think one other thing we can talk about with capitalist realism is the diminishing the horizons of something like science fiction. It's the denuded nature of science fiction actually over the last 20 or 30 years. That that's still still in cyberpunk, still in Blade Runner. What a science fiction generated as a plausible future world, or not plausible, but any sort of future world since that day, since that time, that mode, nothing, and it's kind of significant that recently people like William Gibson or Sterling, Bruce Sterling, have sort of retreated from science fiction altogether, even in its cyberpunk form, and said, Gibson saying, I don't write science fiction anymore, just write about how things are now. And actually, there's an essay on online a few months ago by Bruce Sterling about atemporality, which is in a way redescribing a lot of the phenomena I talked about earlier on, but sort of saying, well, that's how things are now, we've just got to face it. But I think that that a kind of diminution of dreaming, of social dreaming, you could say, of the dreaming of counter possibilities, of counter worlds. This is also a symptom and a cause of capitalist realism. That we need this kind of production as well, production on this level, because it at least have the effect of denaturalizing this world in which we live, and also suggesting something that we could struggle towards. But I think, again, in terms of some of the things I've talked about, I think we need to have collective refusal of these mechanisms of anxiety production. Okay, like no, we're not doing self-surveillance anymore. Right? No, we're not doing it. This is what. Let's look. I think in terms of teaching, as I say in capitalist realism, there's still these old Jurassic, totally ineffective Fordist tactics of one day strikes. School teachers, totally stupid. Who cares? Or university teachers, one day out, oh dear, the whole economy grinds to a halt. No, what actually happens is the management of the colleges and universities goes, great, I saved our wage bill this month. That's what who really cares? But what they would care about was if you said, okay, I'm not filling in, we're not participating in any inspection, we're not taking part in it, we're not doing any external examining, we're not engaging in, we're not feeding you statistics, we're not engaging in these, we're not filling in these logbooks, self-surveying, we're not doing any of that. The point is that the institution would run along perfectly happily in terms of the consumers, on what if you're talking about a college or a university, as if the students would care if you've not filled in your logbooks, or you've done your duties to managerial lists. No, they're not going to care. But the managers would care, and that because it makes their life difficult. And these are the kind of things that I think, these kind of strategies. I think the point is that what is the difference between trade union type conflict and anti-capitalist protest? Is that the antagonism is located in the workplace, right? So it's and that's we need to get back to that situation where antagonism is where people work, not something that they do outside work, as it were.
Isn't there a problem to the fact that there are no workplaces? I mean,
okay, that is a problem.
At least not for me.
Yep.
I mean, and there is only management and no work left. And I mean, I work all the time, but I'm also unemployed all the time. But I still feel better if I've been doing one day of Facebooking, because then I think that I've managed my work somehow in a way that makes me feel a bit better. But I haven't really met anyone.
No. Is it quite true there's no workplace at all? I mean,
we're here now
But I mean, I do take the point. It's an important one, and the difference that it's not. I mean, so the analogy isn't going to completely work with those old Fordist conditions. Okay, but now, but there is work, and there are managerialists, I think, right? And I think we have to force the difference, really, force the difference between the two. That now. The point is not against management per se. We need managers, right? But we just don't need managerialists, which is management for its own sake, and for the increase of wealth of managers, and also the managers serve this function of, as I say, anxiety production. I think this is where someone like Negri is effectively right. That in lots of ways, this managerialist capitalist class is just a parasite on processes which could continue better without them. And I think it's forcing. How we can do that is forcing forcing this question. That that managerialists don't help us do our work better. They make it more difficult for us to do our work. But I accept that you're right. That when we're dispersed in space, when we have short-term contracts or 0 hours contracts or whatever, that that the conditions for this kind of thing are much harder. But like trade unions didn't come out of platonic heaven, as it were. They didn't. They emerged out of people thinking about what would how they could better their situation in those conditions of 19th century industrial capitalism. That we need to be thinking in the same way, don't we? That's not that. Okay, these are the difficulties now, but does that mean it's insuperable? Nothing can be done. Well, that's what capitalist realism is telling us, right? But it may well be true. But also, I don't know. Have we tried everything out, or what? And that I don't think we have tried anything out. But also, this time that we're coming into is a different time. That whatever. Although when I was finishing the book, I was kind of thinking it was just as the bank bailouts were happening. I was thinking, what is the point of writing this book? Capitalism will end before the book. If I finish the book, didn't quite work out like that. But that, but it doesn't mean nothing happened. Something massive did happen there. Something massive did happen in 2008, and now we're in this moment of where history can start again, I think. I don't think there's a lot we could have done before 2008 in lots of ways. It wasn't just errors or mistakes or we got things wrong, we could have done things better. Everything was set up against us at that point. Now the situation has changed, and I think that is, it's an opportunity. And, it's a once in a lifetime one. For those of us, older than most of you, but I don't know if it's worse for you or me. I've had to endure it longer. You've only ever seen it. What's worse? I don't know. This is a space. This is a space, and so what I mean is the kind of, if we start thinking about it now, there's a chance for that being effective in a way it wasn't 5 years ago, I think. Yeah.
If you go back to what you were talking about, science fiction and not really producing anything new to look forward to. There is like a widespread escapism that we all devote ourselves to.
Yeah.
And I am thinking is this always negative, or could that entail that something new would come out of that? I mean, that's my hope, That you need this escape.
What do you mean by escapism? Widespread escapism?
You watch these television series for hours on end. You can't get out of it. You get this feeling that something is happening, but you know that it's not. And even if their lives in the TV changes, your life doesn't change very much.
Yeah.
When you come out,
it's like watching Lost or something like that. That's what I felt like I was watching that. No, but I mean, no, I don't. I mean, the thing is, I think part of the problem is there's increasingly less escapism. That's part of what I'm saying. What the sort of impulses that we used to have to escape now go into being embedded even more deeply into the neurosis of our everyday lives. You know, so instead of escaping to some fantasy counterworld, we escape into bloody Facebook or whatever. And actually, it's quite, if you read this book by Sherry Turkle, it's very quite moving about how difficult young people find this Facebook world. The level of stress they're under in its constant performance anxiety. It's really quite poignant moments when almost none of them can cope with real-time telephone calls. They, you know, but also she notes in the book that real-time telephone calls, probably all of us now regard them as this unacceptable intrusion. Now, I'm not going to phone them up. It's an intrusion. Why do we think that? Because we ourselves think that way. Oh, the phone rings. Oh God, who's doing that? You know, and if it's the landline ringing, you know it's like either your parents or someone trying to sell you something, isn't it? Like, but you know you know, why can't they cope with that? Because they're used to this delay with things like SMS or even you know, instant messenger, etc., where they have time to compose their response. And she says that you know, what they'll do is they'll spend all their time, you know, they'll spend hours on this trying to get this 140 character text, getting the right level of nonchalance into this, and it's 140 character text. You know, just that it seems to me that, you know, if these kids were escaping more, their lives would be better. And not escape. The impulse that went into escaping has gone into this depressing production of this depressing performance of a neurotic identity, which there's no escape from. And that's what I think, that's also why the echo of reality TV itself. Reality TV is part of capitalist realism, I think. The whole foreclosure of the fictional as such, or the symbolic as such, in favour of this depressing notion of competitive individualism, which was pushed by reality TV, which is as depressing as it was compulsive. You know, please bring back escapism. And I mean, I completely agree with you that there's always some, that if there's, you know, there's always something in some potentially recuperable utopian dimension in actual escapism. But it's that's the nature of the cyberspace-time prison in which we're in, is that once we would have escaped, now we go and look at photographs of ourselves on Facebook. You know, like.
As you were saying earlier, we can't formulate anything. We can't like escape and retreat and then formulate.
No, exactly.
Something to give back, you know, an alternative.
No, because we don't have time, and like I think the extent to which we don't have time is we underestimate this, because we deny our own time. Or we deny it. You know, we don't have time. Like, there's plaintive anecdotes in here about children, you know, who you know, just wish that their mother would one day just look at them when the mother picks up the child in the car. The child is desperately hoping that one day the mother will look up first at the child instead of be sitting there looking at messages the whole time. And of course we can't sit in judgment. We are that mother, right? You know, like in some way or another, we can totally understand that. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Just want to the point about this, like talk about William Gibson.
Yeah.
And like I think there's a big flaw with that, like neuromancer like view of today's world.
Yes.
Because if you look at Deleuze and Guattari's view of capitalism,
yeah.
I think a big point is that it's not only deterritorialization but also re-territorial.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So there is actually, we are producing things, but the speed has increased of capitalism, like the rate of consumption.
Yeah.
At least that's how I think of it.
Right.
But I mean, the point of it is that like capitalism isn't totally distributed. It isn't totally devoid of substance. So I think that's what we have to realize, that there is actually some things, material things, and that's also an important point, like with Deleuze and Guattari.
Yeah, I agree.
There is, it's a material strata. It's something physical that we can attack. And
okay, so how do you think? Just for instance, what sort of physical things can we attack?
Like the things we spoke about this whole lecture. I mean,
yeah, okay.
The construction of individuality is created by architectonics, by physical structures in the world.
Right.
Yeah. So basically, well, it's a very general statement, but there is some things, physical
Okay.
things that we have to change.
Okay.
And I just
Yeah.
wanted to make that.
No, I think this point about that this is absolutely crucial. I think this thing about reterritorialization as well as deterritorialization of that.
People make this like that we have to change some ideological or idea, but it's actually habitual. We have to do something physically.
Yes, well, I think the two are tied up. I think we can't do the one without the other.
It was an interesting comment on the news a couple of weeks ago here in Stockholm, where the architect school burned down, and the first statement from the architect school was, we ensure you that we will rebuild the school as it were.
Okay.
I think then physical structures and so on.
Yeah.
What is this that we ensure you, instead of saying, fucking hell, this is a great time, we can change architecture by changing the school. That's whoever it might be, right? But nobody even thinks, well, let's outsource it, sell it to IKEA immediately. Let's rebuild as we want, as it always was. So there's some kind of a feedback loop into this also of wanting it to remain, since we are so fucking keen on keeping our jobs.
Yes.
I mean, if we change the organization, if we change the institution, it might be that I am on the street. So we have this in university world, as you all know, that the economy of the university is shrinking.
Yeah.
So what do? We decrease the time that we spend with the students.
Yes, and have more of them.
And have more of them, and keep our own jobs.
Yeah.
And try to do the same education for less money.
Yes.
Very rarely I see somebody saying, okay, then let's change the whole story around.
Right. Well,
and then we wonder, so you're a philosophy teacher or critical political science, and the first thing you do is you maintain the structural proposal of your organization instead of trying something else out, right?
Well, that's it, and I think that's partly that the advantage that capital has got over its opponents is that the opponents exist in a Fordist mentality, whereas capitalism exists in post-Fordism. So like particularly with university labour, we're desperately trying to protect something which is gone, which is the Fordist conditions of security, etc. for academic work. Those conditions have gone; they'll never come back. And the more that we try and protect them, the weaker our position will be. Exactly, we need to think ahead, not for how we can restore things. And that is to do with, I think that Berardi and the Italian autonomists and Negri, they're right. It's about precariousness. Like precariousness was originally a good thing. Like the people said, like it's good to be precarious in the 70s. Why? Because you could drop out of work for months, go fuck you, I'm not working until you can and drop back in again. Now that precariousness has been reversed. But look, I don't want to go back to a stable job actually in that way. But what we want is conditions where things are on the side of the precarious worker rather than everything's, exploiting the precarious worker, which is a situation now, because part of that dimension of what you're describing is the way in which workers with quasi-Fordist conditions are set against precarious workers. That happens in these institutions all the time. In a sense that you get, well, look, what's the threat over the Fordist workers? It is that, oh well, look, if you don't work, you'll be precarious. If you don't comply, you'll be precarious like this lot. And what's the hold over the precarious workers? If you work here for 15 years in these really bad conditions, maybe you'll be able to aspire to become like one of these older kind of fossilized Fordists. And that instead of, while that dynamic's in place, it's kind of hopeless, I think. Instead of like, okay, what do we do? How do we all become precarious in a way that is advantageous to us and not to capital? It's words like flexibility. They were our words first, and they were stolen by them. Like of course we want to be flexible. We want to be, but on our terms, not yours. And this is what the struggle has to be about, doesn't it? Not reconstituting those things which we wanted to escape from in the first place. And as I say, it's the question of what did we want when we wanted to escape? If it wasn't this.
So I think this activist sense of on maybe, and then what did that do for anyone else in the entire rest of the world who were, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yes. and I also think the tendency towards, you can see there's a lot of things in the UK at the moment, tendency towards fighting the police or whatever, which is, or getting in a situation where, you know, this is the case. I mean, that's also equally ineffective, I think. Okay, the police aren't the enemy; they're just the servants of the enemy, which is different. You know, so if you don't go to the enemy, don't go to the servants of the enemy, go to the actual enemy itself, and see what we can you can do about that. You know what I mean? If you're ending up in scuffles with the servants of the enemy's pretty happy about that. You know, in lots of ways.
I've been thinking about what you said about history and its potential to begin.
Yeah.
Or to start.
Yeah.
And how this might relate to the lack of or consistency of escapism and nostalgia.
Okay.
Where we started out.
Yeah.
Somehow. Because it's a little bit sad when you think about it. 1985 by George Orwell. It's long. It's quite some time now.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah.
He wrote it in 58, wasn't it like that? The reversal.
84.
84. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
48.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Maybe that's the one I wrote. But yeah. And then you have 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Sad. You know, and these kinds. So and then you have Fukuyama, which is a different kind of.
Yes, but I think that, like
science
I say,
fiction, where he claims that this is Hegel's absolute.
We all believe him, though, don't we? The point is that at some level, we all believe Fukuyama is right. We all believe that there's that you know the tendency of history is towards capitalism, and that, you know, once we've got into this mess or this state, we can't really get out of it again. I mean, I'm not saying we believe it at every level, but at the level of a certain, you know, kind of political unconscious, we believe it. And, you know, but Vanessa, if we start off from that, we've got to start off from the fact, accepting that that is what we do believe. Yeah, and and then, you know, all this whole matrix of measures that we talked about, or steps that we need to be undertaken from here.
You may be interested in the problem of history,
right.
Since you set out speaking about nostalgia, being devoid of its original content, replayed somehow, or reenacted.
Yeah.
And I mean, I brought up Fukuyama because the book you wrote echoes.
Yes.
From a different perspective.
It does, yeah.
That very claim.
It does,
that
yeah.
This is the end of history because its entropy is here.
Yes.
So that's why I also got. I had to think twice when you reinstated the concept of history, saying that now it could start, or is it restarting, or?
Yes. Well, I mean, I don't accept the situation as described in the book. Really, I mean, I just think that there's a kind of like isn't a step though, that acknowledging that that's how we do think, or that's how things have been made to appear. Because isn't that a step towards actually getting out of it? I mean that.
Speaking of science fiction as a means of speculating a possible utopia, I think it's quite common that you situate a possible utopia somewhere in history, whether it's a science fiction, I mean a utopia, futurist utopia, or it might be one, you know, like we had this joke with a friend the other day that when we were kids, we were playing as it were in the old days.
Yes.
The game where you meet and you say, let's pretend we were in before. Yeah. And that this is also a utopia, because you have to speculate. So.
But I think we also need to, conversely, to, and this is partly what I was trying to do with what we're saying today, is to dystopianize our own time. That's what I mean about this. How, you know, have we really thought how bad it is, this thing about intentional deficit? To just think about everything you do now. Everything you do is tyrannized by this digital twitch. You know, like everything. You can't, you know, you can't settle to anything. We're all like junkies at some level. Like it's really, you know, this is not, you know, dystopianizing the present is also a backdoor route to the utopia as well, I think. Do you know what I mean? I think that's part. I guess I'm better at dystopianizing, I think, than about utopia.
Maybe we should dystopianize tomorrow.
Okay.
And
well,
we have been spending now 3.5 good hours with each other.
Well, thanks for staying this long. I'm very impressed that you can put up with this for this long, and especially in this heat as well. So, well, thanks everybody, and it's been a really good discussion from my point of view, anyway.
So we start at 10 o'clock tomorrow, and we meet in the cafe and continue into a deep dystopia.
What time did you say?
10 o'clock. Is it a morning session tomorrow?
That's not. I mean, I have to